Welcome to BuffaloRumblings.com. My name is Matt Warren. I'm joined today by a special guest, Jay Skurski of the Buffalo News. Say hi, Jay.
Hey, how you doing, Matt? Hello, everyone, I guess.
I'm doing okay, and we're recording this on the day after the Buffalo Bills season concluded at 9-7. So this is the first time in a decade they've had a winning record. Did their record surprise you, Jay?
Yeah. I mean, I picked them. I think at the beginning of the season in the paper to go 6-10 or something like that. So they certainly outperformed my expectations for them. But as the season went on, it surprised me, I guess, in two different ways. One, if you asked me in August, did I think they'd go 9-7? No. But then if you asked me in November, did I think they should, that they could go 9-7? I would say, well, that might be a bit of a disappointment if they don't go 10-6, because I think they had that kind of talent on this team. So, and I think that's kind of where everybody is at. Is that, yes, a 3-win improvement from year 1 to year 2 under Doug Marrone is great. But the fact that they missed the playoffs with as talented of a roster as they have, and the opportunities that they had this season that they let get away from them, I think is what is kind of sticking with a lot of people right now. In that, this was a team that was close, and they didn't get there. And you can look at that two different ways. Do you credit the coach for getting them this far, or do you maybe put a little bit of the blame on him that he wasn't able to take them the entire way?
Yeah, it looks good on paper when you're 9-7 and you have that 3-win improvement, like you said. But at the same time, they're 10th in the AFC after all the tiebreakers were sorted out, and maybe a win over Kansas City changes that, or Houston, or one of those other games in a tiebreaker against Baltimore at 10-6. But even then, I don't think that this Bills record was a fake Bills record. They won games against the Minnesota Vikings and Detroit Lions that maybe they didn't earn. I mean, obviously, you always earn a win, but if we're going to talk about games that way, and then they had those two hard losses, Texans and Chiefs, that came down to maybe one or two plays in some of those games. So, I mean, the ball's not always going to bounce your way, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, yeah, it was a disappointment to finish 9-7, but in a lot of ways they could have been way worse, and we could be having a much different conversation today. When you talk about the coach like you just did, do you credit Doug Marrone, or do you think that they could have done better, or were you disappointed?
I think I've been pretty hard on Doug Marrone really all season, and I think justifiably so. I mean, there are a lot of different reasons for that. I think the main one being, though, is that Doug Marrone was brought in as a guy who was going to fix the offense. That was his background. He was an offensive lineman. He, Russ Brandon threw around words like progressive and forward thinking and aggressive in describing what he wanted to get in a head coach. And the Bills got the opposite of that. I mean, Doug Marrone is as conservative as they come as a coach. And yes, they went 9-7 and they made improvements. So did it kill them? No. But do I think that he's the reason that they went 9-7? I give more of the credit for that to the defense, and Doug Marrone would be the first to tell you that he's pretty hands-off on that side of the ball. He sort of lets his coordinators there do their thing. And evidence of that, you can find in the Denver game when he didn't know that Jerry Hughes was on the sideline for as long as he was. That tells me a lot about how much of an active role Doug Marrone has in the defense. So I do give him I think he does deserve some credit. I mean, you cannot take away a 9-7 winning season, the first time in a decade that they've had that. But at the same time, this is an offense that finished 26th in the NFL, down from 19th a year ago, and he was brought in here because of that, because of his offensive background, even going back to his days with the New Orleans Saints. And this is an offense that's still nowhere, and especially that's true at the quarterback position, and not all of that can fall on him. But he was involved in those discussions when they drafted E.J. Manuel, which has not worked, thus far. He was the one that decided to go to Kyle Orton. Kyle Orton gave them some good play at times, but I don't think that Kyle Orton did well enough for this team. I mean, there were games that they won in spite of Kyle Orton, not because of Kyle Orton. So, I think a lot of that has to go back to the head coach, and they need to get better on offense. This is a league, and we've seen it year in and year out, where the Seahawks maybe were the exception, but if you go back 2 years ago to when the Ravens won the Super Bowl, they won in spite of their defense, not because of it. I mean, you have to be able to score points in this league, and the Bills don't do that well enough, and I think a lot of the blame has to go to Doug Marrone for that.
And you mentioned that he was brought in for his offensive line. He was also a former offensive line coach, and just to see where the rushing game ended up this year is just kind of, I don't know, it's it was horrible. There's not, I don't know how many different ways you can say it. They averaged 3.7 yards a carry with C.J. Spiller and Fred Jackson, and these guys are no slouches, especially with Spiller being a former first-round pick. I know he was out for a large part of the year, but they never really got him going. Do you see them making any changes on the offensive side of the ball to kind of combat those problems that we've talked about, whether it's points, rushing yards? Obviously, they're going to have to make a change at the quarterback position. But what about the other areas?
Yeah, I think you could see significant changes on offense, really outside of wide receiver. I think that's the only position where you know who your two starters are going to be going into next year, and Watkins and Woods, and probably Chris Hogan if the same staff is back as your number 3. But I think after that, it's wide open in terms of changes. I mean, they got nothing from the running game, as you mentioned. C.J. Spiller is an unrestricted free agent. If you're him, why are you coming back here? I mean, I can't see any scenario unless this is the only place that offers him a worthwhile contract that he would want to resign here. I mean, he has been marginalized and really phased out of the offense in 2 years under Doug Marrone. Yes, injuries have played a role, but we've seen it in games even when he's healthy. I mean, his playing time has steadily decreased under the staff. So if he's gone, that leaves you with just Fred Jackson. I think at some point we have to recognize that he's the oldest running back in the NFL. He brings a ton to the team in terms of leadership and is still very capable of being a player. But how much longer do you really want him to be your franchise running back, your workhorse running back? I don't think much longer. That leaves you with Bryce Brown, who they acquired, yet can't find a way to get on the field to help one of the biggest problems area is the rushing attack. So all of those problems then also trace back to the offensive line, where there could be massive overhauls. They've got an unrestricted free agent in Eric Pierce. You wouldn't expect him back. Craig Urbick, was not a starter at the beginning of the season. Clearly is not a favorite of Doug Marrone. You wouldn't expect him to be back in a starting role if he is back at all. Eric Wood's play regressed this year. Cordy Glenn's play regressed this year to the point where I wouldn't be shocked if we saw a move for Cordy Glenn inside to guard and to see Chantrell Henderson move over to left tackle. Of course, that doing that opens up another hole on right tackle. Tight end is a position it seems like every year we talk about how they could stand to upgrade that position and get a more athletic option than Scott Chandler there. And all of that's being addressed without addressing the elephant in the room, and that's who's going to be the quarterback. Is it going to be E.J. Manuel? I can't see it, based on the season that he had and really falling out of favor the way he did with the coaching staff. So a lot of those issues there. I mean, we just went over pretty much every position on offense, and there could be
easy to do.
Change. Yeah, it's significant that the changes that we could be looking at across the board for this offense.
So let's kind of wrap up the 2014 season talking about the defense that did perform so well this year. I had someone ask me if it was the best defense the Bills have ever put on the field. I don't know if I want to go that far. I mean, we're talking about like 50-something years where going back to the 65 team had a pretty good defense and things like that. But obviously it was certainly a great defense, a very good defense, and I don't think that they lost the step substituting Jim Schwartz for Mike Pettin. And some of the credit for that does have to go to Doug Marrone, who was able to go and land Jim Schwartz right after Mike Pettin leaves. After that, it was a really prolonged search by the Cleveland Browns. If you remember, they brought in Pettin for, I think it was 3 interviews over the course of, I can't even remember how many weeks, as they were trying to do their due diligence. And then Marrone was able to turn around and grab Jim Schwartz. What kind of stood out to you about the defense this year, other than the switch from the 3-4 to the 4-3?
Well, I think just the strength of the defensive line and how it didn't take a step backwards. Maintaining defensive performance like the Bills did. I mean, they didn't just, maintain what they did well in 2013. They got better this year, and that's hard to do defensively. I mean, even the Seahawks weren't quite as dominant this year as they were last year in their Super Bowl year. So circling back to what you said about Doug Marrone, he absolutely deserves credit for identifying Jim Schwartz. I mean, he wasted very little time in filling that hole, and he's really gone 2 for 2 in hitting home runs on his defensive coordinator. So he does deserve a lot of credit for that. Bills fans have to kind of hope now that he doesn't have to go 3 for 3, and that Jim Schwartz, isn't turning, or isn't other teams, Oakland, Atlanta, these teams with head coaching openings aren't knocking on Jim Schwartz's door now. I think that's going to be a topic for the coming days. Is will his name be bandied about as a candidate? But to get back to what the defense did well, I mean, it's you don't need to be a rocket scientist to watch a single game and see that they were really impressive in terms of rushing the quarterback again. They were able to do it without blitzing. I thought the secondary came on. I misread the Jarris Byrd situation. I thought it was a huge mistake to let him go. It turns out that they were able to withstand that void, or fill that void pretty well with Denora Skurski, who I think is an underrated player.
And a free agent, so that's going to be an interesting conversation too. Go on, you were talking about Stephon Gilmore.
Yeah, I think he took really positive steps forward in his career. Corey Graham turned out to be a heck of a signing, veteran presence, but also a good player on the field. And you're getting Kiko Alonso back next year, so you've got to like what you've seen from the linebackers. So do I think that the Bills will be quite as good as they were this year on defense next year? If they, of course, you got to bring back Jerry Hughes into that mix too. No, I mean, because it's really, really hard to maintain that type of performance from year to year. But I think that the pieces are in place for this defense to continue to give the Bills a chance to win if their offense can catch up, and that's the key.
Absolutely. There are a few key free agents on the defense. You talked about Jerry Hughes. I think most Bills fans think it's pretty obvious that they need to re-sign him, whether it's a long-term deal, and then you're locking up, 4 big-time moneymakers on the defensive line, or even the franchise tag. I think it's like $14 million for the franchise tag for defensive end next year. Then there's Brandon Spikes, who the blow would be softened if he left, with Kiko Alonso coming back and Preston Brown having a rookie year that most of us didn't really anticipate him doing so well right out of the gate. And then Denora Skurski on the back end. So at all 3 levels, they've got key free agents that they're going to need to address. What do you think about the free agents? Are they going to be able to get those guys back for next year?
Well, starting with Hughes, they've got the money now. They've freed up some money in terms of Mike Williams not being on the roster. And also with the retirement of Kyle Orton, that also frees up some significant money. So they've made some salary cap room in recent weeks that they'll have the money for Jerry Hughes. And I think absolutely, as long as that defensive line remains the strength of the team, you need to do everything in your power to keep it together. Skurski, I think, has played very well. I think he's an underrated player for them, really, for the last 2 years. I think that he's developed and become, an every down safety, and a guy who's shown that he can play more than just against the run. He can play the pass too. So I think he's in line for sort of a middle of the road second contract. I don't think he's going to get big time starter money, but I do think that he's an important piece. And I can tell you from talking with his teammates, they all rave about how smart he is, and I think that goes a long way too. Brandon Spikes is really probably one of the harder decisions, because I thought he brought a lot to this team. He helped the run defense, but he only played about 50% of the snaps. And when you have Kiko Alonso coming back, Nigel Bradham, I think, is a terrific player, and Preston Brown has sort of shown that he can play in every situation. You wonder how much room that leaves for Brandon Spikes, and will he want to look elsewhere for a starting opportunity? I think if that's the case, you could see a scenario where they don't he isn't re-signed because of the depth that they have at linebacker elsewhere.
Yeah, I'm on board with that Brandon Spikes stuff. There's not really a spot for him to make a major impact. That 50% without Kiko Alonso around is only going to go down, I would think. So as we enter this offseason, they have a pretty impressive win over the Green Bay Packers on their resume. They have a pretty disappointing loss against the Raiders, and then this win against the Patriots that backups played half the game in. I mean, it's the first win at Gillette Stadium. There's lots of different ways to look at that last game. Is the arrow pointing up or down on these Bills entering the 2014-15 offseason?
I'm going to sound negative, but I have to say down because of the uncertainty at quarterback. I mean, it's really, really difficult to to feel very optimistic about this team when you don't know who's going to be throwing the passes next year. And the only option, the only legitimate option on the roster right now is a guy who was benched after 4 games and has seemed to fall out of favor with the current coaching staff. And I would also say that, you know, EJ Manuel's got a long way to go in terms of winning back the trust of his teammates. I don't think it's there. So if that's the case, I mean, it's tough to feel really good about this team. They've got a lot of nice pieces in place, but they've got a huge gaping hole at the most important position on the field, and it's going to be difficult to fill that. They're not the only team that has struggled to find a quarterback, but this team's prolonged struggle to find a quarterback is probably the biggest reason out of any that the playoff drought is now at 15 years.
I'm joined by Jay Skurski of the Buffalo News today for this special Buffalo Rumblings video. So let's talk a little bit about how they might address that quarterback position going into the offseason. They signed Jeff Toole to a reserve futures contract, so that guy's going to be around this offseason. And then they've got EJ Manuel, who you just talked about. They don't have a first-round pick. I'm looking at the list of free agent quarterbacks right now. It's not that great. What on earth are they going to do to improve at the quarterback position?
Well, if it's not through the draft, because if you bring in a rookie to compete with EJ Manuel and Jeff Toole, and that goes against any kind of semblance of we're in win now mode, and if they are in win now mode, which I think they should be, because they are this close, they did go 9-7, they have this playoff caliber defense, they're that close, then it's got to be a veteran. And you just mentioned the free agent list. It'd make you kind of throw up a little bit in your mouth if you're a Bills fan and you go through those guys and read that list. I mean, probably the most attractive name on there is Mark Sanchez. Okay, well, maybe Mark Sanchez. Right. I mean, I don't see Bills fans rushing to the ticket office to purchase their season tickets if they sign Mark Sanchez. So, what does that leave you if you rule out the draft and free agency? Obviously, a trade. So then that's where you have to get creative. And I've kicked around ideas for a few weeks now on what they could do in that situation. I don't know exactly. I mean, a large part of this is which players will become available. Will a guy like Colin Kaepernick in San Francisco become available? I mean, it's hard for me to see a scenario where their current teams, if they have any belief at all that there's something there and that it might be a franchise guy, that they would trade him. So that rules out, to me, guys like Cam Newton or Colin Kaepernick. I don't see how their teams would currently trade them. So then it becomes, do you roll the dice on a guy like Jay Cutler who comes with a massive contract? He's a talented player, but things went terribly south for him this year in Chicago. Do you try to pry maybe Nick Foles from Philadelphia, because Chip Kelly, you sort of never know what he's thinking at quarterback? Does Washington give up on Robert Griffin III? If so, what would it cost to acquire him? Those are the types of players that I think you kind of have to look to. They're those young veterans that may be available. Like I said, this is where Doug Whaley, if he is the guy that's making the decisions, and as of right now it is, that he has to earn his money and get really creative, because the draft and free agency doesn't seem like it'll be able to fill this void. That means you have to turn to a trade. And without a first-round pick, your ammunition is lessened. I don't think they want to give up too many other draft picks. Right. So then you're talking about current players on the roster maybe.
And I think that might be why the Cutler one is a little bit more realistic as far as trade value, because there's no way that the Bears can expect to get a high pick for Jay Cutler with that massive contract. And I know that you lumped him in with a couple other guys calling him a young veteran. That dude's 30. That makes me feel old, by the way. So anyway, I want to run down a couple of the free agent quarterbacks, and just give me, like, I don't know, maybe one word or one sentence, like, is this guy better than Kyle Orton? And we'll just go with the Kyle Orton metric, okay? Okay. So I'm just going based on their 2014 cap hit down here. So Matt Moore from the Miami Dolphins, is he above or below the Orton line?
Below.
Below. Okay. Jake Locker, Tennessee.
Also below. I mean, he's hurt all the time. He can't stay on the field.
It's true. Mike Vick.
Ooh, below. Turnover machine.
Matt Hasselbeck.
He's
He's 39, by the way.
Yeah, he's below. I mean,
Below.
I thought
Okay.
he was a TV analyst.
Well, he was for like one game. Christian Ponder.
Also below.
Oh, very below. You mentioned Mark Sanchez, so you'd probably put him above.
I think Sanchez is the best free agent option. I would put him above Kyle Orton. Yes.
Okay, Blaine Gabbert. Below. Okay,
I think Jim Harbaugh might try to find a way to get him eligible at Michigan. That may be where he plays next.
Nice. Sean Hill.
Oh, jeez.
We're going. I'm just going by the. I mean, we're not even to Brian Hoyer yet. So Sean Hill.
below.
And Jason Campbell's below. I'm not even going to ask you about that. Tavares Jackson's probably below, right?
Yes.
So then we get to Brian Hoyer.
Okay.
Is he above or below the Orton line?
He's at it. I think he's equal. I think he's yeah. I mean, you know, if it was an over under, I think he would be right on the number. I think
he'd be the
Brian
push.
Hoyer
Okay.
Yeah, he'd be the push. Brian Hoyer is kind of what you're getting from Kyle Orton, I think.
Matt Flynn.
Below.
And then
we've been down that road.
Yes, we have Ryan Mallett. Houston Texans intriguing.
Too unproven for me to so below at the moment, but he's maybe one of the more intriguing names that you mentioned, only because he's an unknown. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's any good, but he's just an unknown.
I'm skipping a couple of names here. Jimmy Clausen.
Below.
Colt McCoy.
That's intriguing. That might be on the Hoyer level as better than Jimmy Clausen, but it would be also another one that's pretty hard to get excited about. I would say he's probably below Orton. I mean, Orton didn't have a horrible statistical year for them. It's just a matter of, a lot of these guys are out there for a reason. They're out there for a reason because they're like Kyle Orton, decent backups, but not good starters.
Absolutely. And then we've got, there's a restricted free agent, Kellen Moore, that worked with some of the Detroit Lions staff when they were there with Jim Schwartz. And then why can't I think of the quarterback coach's name? It doesn't really matter. Nobody cares. I mean, you can keep going down the list, like Ryan Lindley, Thad Lewis, Case Keenum, Tyler Thigpen. I mean, these are the guys that we're talking about in this conversation. And you start to understand sort of why the Bills signed Kyle Orton at the end of last summer. And then you think back to the summer before that, we're talking about names like Matt Leinart and things like that. The Bills quarterback situation is not very good. So let's talk about the guy that might have the most upside of any of them, and that's E.J. Manuel. You said that he has to earn the respect of his teammates back or something along those lines. Is there any reason for you to believe that E.J. Manuel could be the guy in 2015?
Well, the only reason that I would believe it is because the lengthy list of guys that we just went through are no better, and that's really the only encouraging thing or thing that would lead you to believe that Manuel has an opportunity here because, let's face it, the competition out there, I mean, this is a quarterback-starved league, and based on the available names that we just talked about, it's easy to see why. And Manuel, if anything, if anything else, at least has a couple of years of experience in this system, and will have a full and better understanding of what this staff wants from him. Can he get there? The early returns, and it still is early in terms of his playing career, have not been positive, or else they wouldn't have made the change that they did so quickly. But he doesn't have any competition right now in terms of what they're going to do. So, yes, that leads me to believe that he is an option. Is he the best option or the only option? I don't think that will be the case, but he'll definitely be in the mix. There is no reason for them to cut E.J. Manuel or anything like that, because doing so would actually cost them money in terms of the salary cap. So I fully expect him to come back and have an opportunity to compete for that job. And based on the names that we just talked about, like I said, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they've determined that he's the guy. Would you like to see him make massive strides? Of course, everyone would. But the faith in the staff that he can do that, I don't think is really there. I mean, they would have given him a shot at some point during the season. This offense was sputtering for large stretches under Kyle Orton. There was an opportunity to play in a meaningless game that the staff didn't take to get, I don't know how much you can learn about E.J. Manuel that you didn't already know in one meaningless game in New England, but the fact that they didn't take it, I think, says to me a lot in the sense that they didn't want to learn anything else about him. So that's troubling. All of that is troubling, but it's maybe not as troubling as the list of available guys that we went through.
Let's talk one last question, and let's talk about the top two guys in the NFL draft, Marcus Mariota and Jameis Winston from Florida State. Is there any way that the Bills can get up into, say, I'll even give them the top five, not even the top 2 or 3. Is there any way the Bills can get up into the top 5 to take one of those guys and start beginning of 2015?
I don't think, I say no. I mean, unless it, involved trade, a really crazy trade where they were to trade, I would think that it would take a player like Sammy Watkins off of their roster to move up that far, and, why would they do that, They don't have that first-round pick. I mean, to move from where I think currently they're at number 50 in the second round,
yep.
They would have to be mortgaging probably two first-round picks in the future, plus a current player off the roster, plus probably number 50. I mean, you were absolutely selling the farm in that sense to move up for one of those guys. And with the character issues that Winston has and the questions about Mariota and how his game translates to the NFL, I don't think there's any possibility at all that they do that. And I'm sure now that I've said that, they'll be working on a trade shortly that they'll be glad to report on. But
yeah, I'm sure Doug Whaley's tuning into YouTube tonight and on the Buffalo Rumblings this week to make sure he sees this video, to make sure he can stick it to Jay Skurski.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, it would be hard, far-fetched for me, or very hard to believe or see how a deal like that would come together.
Well, you can read the rest of his thoughts in the Buffalo News. Get the Sunday edition, get the coupons, and watch read his Bills coverage. You can follow him on Twitter at Jay Skurski, one of the great Bills beat reporters that's out there working every week, and I'm sure all off-season in an off-season that just got much, much more interesting. Thank you very much, Jay Skurski, for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Matt. Happy New Year, and appreciate it.
Same to you.